So our first step in starting a VO2 max test is to actually calibrate our metabolic cart. So we have a VacuMed brand metabolic cart, and it's the model Mini CPX. So it's a fractional sample of oxygen and carbon dioxide as opposed to a full sample. So a Parvo would be an example of one of the units or the brands that takes a full sample. And there are some advantages and some disadvantages of that. So in a metabolic cart which takes a full sample, you have big bulky tubes that are collecting all the air that the subject's breathing in and breathing out to send into the metabolic cart unit. For our sample, we have these very narrow tubes which are a lot lighter to hold up, and they tend to be more comfortable for the subject because they don't require as much headgear. Our samples are a little bit less accurate because they're fractional samples as opposed to something that's pulling in all the air instead of a fraction of the air. So to get started, when you are calibrating the metabolic cart, the first thing that you do is open the TurboFit software, which is on the desktop of the metabolic cart computer. The next step is to come up and choose calibration on the menu window. And then we're going to choose to do an auto calibration. So the first thing it does is it tells you to flip this switch on the front of the metabolic cart on. So an important factor here is I had the metabolic cart plugged in and turned on for 30 minutes before I came in to do this test. So you always have to give the machine at least 30 minutes of warm-up time before you run any sort of calibration or any sort of test with it. So for this next step, when you switch on the pump in the front of the machine, you're allowing the machine to actively pull in air. This needs to run for at least a minute before you then do your calibration on the unit. So right now, what it's sampling air from, it's using this gas import, and we're currently just sampling air from the end of this tube. So we're sampling room air. It is not uncommon when you're sampling room air to sometimes get slightly higher CO2 values because of a little bit of buildup in a room if it's not well ventilated. So we actually have a fan on us right now, so we shouldn't have that as a problem. If you look at the front of the metabolic screen, on the top it has what it's sampling for oxygen, and at the bottom it has what it's sampling for carbon dioxide. So we would expect in the room for it to be sampling somewhere between 20.8 and 21.1 for oxygen. And we would be expecting it to sample somewhere between 0.04 to about 0.07 for carbon dioxide. So if in case you forget those numbers, they're in the instruction manual on page 8 on the metabolic cart. So it tells you exactly what numbers you need whenever you're calibrating. There are two dials on the front of the machine that you never touch. Currently they have tape on them and an X next to them. So they're preset whenever they calibrate the unit at the manufacturer. The ones that we change based on our calibration are the ones that don't have tape on them. So the O2 span and the CO2 zero. So right now in this first step, I need to make sure they're within those number ranges that I've provided. So for oxygen, we are within that number range because that's at 20.9. For CO2, it's reading just a hair low. It's reading at 0. So I'm just going to bump that up to be reading at 0.04. And you can see the numbers match what's on the screen up here. And this is specifically the voltage that it's pulling in to assess the oxygen and the carbon dioxide content. So what's important on the screen up here is that these little dials are within the green region. So we can see that they're both within the green region and they're steady and they're not moving. Once we're at that point, we can go ahead and select start. So on our machine, it specifically gives us a smiley face. You might have a check or a thumbs up saying, yep, that part of the calibration was successful. For the next part of the calibration, we don't want to collect room air. Instead, we want to collect some sort of gas calibration that we have provided for us. So our gas calibration is 16% oxygen and 4% carbon dioxide, and it's a mixed gas, so it's just in one tank. So to be able to assess the gas that's in the tank, I'm going to take my tube and I'm going to connect it to the port that says gas cal out. So once that's connected, the next thing I need to do is I need to open up my gas tank. So when I click continue, it's going to say, warning, you need to open your gas tank on the computer screen. So it's lefty-loosey, righty-tighty to open the tank. So I'm going to open that using the valve, and then I have to open the part that controls my flow rate on the side. Importantly, when you run a calibration, the little ball that's bouncing in this unit needs to be within the green dot. And that's specifically because it has to be at a particular flow rate to calculate properly. So we're almost exactly in that section. So I'm just going to back off the gas a little bit because I can do some more fine tuning at the main port for the gas. So I'm just ever so slightly closing that. What you're noticing on the front of the screen is actually adjusting to the correct calibrations for the gas. So I'm right on the dot at 16 for O2 span, and I'm getting pretty close here to 4 for the CO2. So you can see my calibration is slightly off, and this is what's going to correct that calibration, because we're going to tell the computer this is what 4 should be based on what's in the gas tank. And so my little dot is right in the green area, so I'm going to go ahead and hit start. So it gave me a thumbs up smiley face again that that part was complete. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off this portion of the gas tank, and then I'm going to close the gas tank. And it's righty-tighty to close the gas tank. It's really important that you close this well so that you're not losing all of your calibration gas. So then I'm going to go ahead and hit finish. And I can turn off the pump in the front, which it's going to instruct me to do. I can disconnect the calibration gas, so I'm going to unplug this from the unit, and I'm going to show voltages. When I show the voltages, I want to see that I didn't get any warning signs from a previous calibration to tell me something that was very off from a previous calibration. So either that could have been the previous calibration was really incorrect, or this calibration is incorrect. And you're going to know based on using your tank what's going on. If you were to get something that's really off, you need to, one, check your gas, check your steps. You might want to recalibrate it to make sure you didn't forget a particular step. And then you can go on and make sure, once you're confident everything's working in your own setup, if you had a previous poor calibration compared to what you have now, it will tell you what's expected and what the actual is. So the actual numbers, if you're doing everything correctly, should be close to what the expected are. So if these are way off from your calibration gases, and particularly these are the voltages, you might have an issue of when some of these dials have been touched that were preset at the manufacturer, and that would actually require going back to the manufacturer to have that fixed. So usually that is not a problem whenever you're going through this. When you're ready to then start your test, you're just going to click exit to test screen. And now you can go on and you can plug in your subject's information and you can get all started.